right, good morning, everyone. My name is Nir Ben-Tzvi. I'm a program manager on the Windows Server team. And with me is Manny. Can you say your last name? Yeah. Excellent. From MCS. And the reason I really like to have Manny with me to talk about dynamic access control is that Manny actually implemented dynamic access control on customer environments, and he's going to talk about that and show you how we did it. You know, when I came here, I reflected that last year was the first time we introduced dynamic access control. And when we introduced it, we thought, well, it's going to take around 3-4 years until somebody picks it up and starts, really deploying it. And actually, we've been seeing a very, very interesting uptakes from many, many people that just dove in and started using dynamic access control. And many can attest to the fact that you're going to see, I'm going to talk about a lot of things. And it looks very, I would say, scary at the beginning because we cover a lot of topics. But eventually, when you come into implementation, it's pretty easy to start implementing it and using it in your environment. And we really worked hard to try and do it. So we're talking about an older technology. It's not 2012 R2, it's 2012. But there's some few tweaks in 2012 R2 that we did. I'm going to go through the presentation, and unlike the regular presentations, I'm going to stop for questions because I'm covering a lot of different topics, and I want you to not need to remember your questions from an hour ago. So I'm going to stop and give you some time for questions. I'm going to also make sure we don't take all the time for questions because I'd really like Manny to show you what he did. So I'll kind of sometimes cut you short and say, let's talk about it after the presentation if you want to. So with that, how many of you guys know about dynamic access control? Okay, cool. So we have a fair amount of people. So you can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong. Let's go ahead and start. So 7 years ago when I joined the file server team, we looked at the current problem space of what's happening in the world. And we drew out that picture. Information is growing at a 50% year over year. There is distributed environment. Cloud was not there yet, but it's here now. We have a lot of regulatory and business compliance, leakage protection that people are trying to deploy, and people have budget constraints. That picture did not change in the last 7 years, and I think it's not going to change as we move forward. And we tried to really figure out how to help organizations deal with the huge amounts of information on file servers. A lot of it is stale information. A lot of it is new information. You don't know how to differentiate between which is which. And what we're going to talk about as a concept makes sense in other repositories as well, like SharePoint, for example, Exchange, and so on. And we do have partners that went ahead and implemented dynamic access control on top of these repositories. Either it's SharePoint, either it's Exchange, or even non-Windows file shares. We started looking at it from the persona's point of view. So we have the CIO that says, I'd like to stop leakage from my organization. I'd like to be compliant with SOX, HIPAA, and so on. Of course, what he does is he goes to the IT folks and tells them, I want you to make sure I'm compliant so that I can sign on the bottom line. How many of you guys are IT? Yes, excellent. So we're in the right room. The IT folks, which is you're not librarians. You don't know what the data is on the file servers, for example. You know how to set up the systems, you know how to configure them, to monitor them, all these kind of good things. But how do you really deal with what's SOX data, what's HIPAA data, how do I actually enable compliance, how do I prevent leakage? That's hard things to do. I've been working with the Microsoft IT guys for the last 5 years. We didn't stop leakage. We were able to cut it down, but we're still leaking information. And it's a very hard set of problems. So, I feel your pain. Working with the Microsoft IT people really taught me how hard it is It's not only that we bring the technologies to the market, how hard it is to actually go and implement it, to educate the people about it. Making a change a month before the financial year is ending is something you don't do. Things like that in engineering, when we don't talk to IT, we really don't feel that pain, and it's hard for us to imagine it. But being able to implement things like dynamic access control from the bottom up is a hard thing, not because it's hard to configure the systems. It's because you need to change how the organization thinks, and you need to educate your users. And this is where the real challenges are. So as we get to the users, like the content owners, for example, they know what the information is. If they could just tell you, this is HIPAA information, this is here financial, very, very confidential financial information, you could then actually go ahead and implement controls over that information, and they could control what the information is. You could control what policies are applied to that information. And last but not least, the information workers. The main thing we need to do is make sure they continue working without disturbance. They want to be compliant, but they're not really going to do anything about it. And if you kind of not provide them with the right tool set, they're going around you. So if you say, you can only use this network for your files, and they need to share something with somebody else, they're going to put it on SkyDrive. Because if some other guy cannot access it, they can't do their work, and that's it. And they are the fuel that drives your company. So eventually, you need to enable them. Because if you don't enable them, then the company doesn't make money. So that's the problem set that we were kind of looking at. And then we set up a few concepts that will guide us through. And for the last several years, like since 2008 R2, 2012, 2012 R2, and we'll continue that in the future, we kind of follow these guidelines. First, if you can identify the data, and we call it here data classification, if you can identify the data, then you're able to actually go ahead and apply things like access control, audit control, RMS protection, and stuff that's not on these slides, things like expiration, e-discovery, and so on, is made very much easier than if you cannot identify the data. The reason is that if you have, say, a petabyte of data in your organization, or 100 terabytes, or even a terabyte, right? If you don't know what this data is, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to do anything about it, unless you want to encrypt it all and make sure nobody can access it. So in order to be able to find that fine-grained information that you really care about, you need to somehow be able to classify it. And to classify, there's many ways to do it. There's the users doing that manually, which usually doesn't happen unless you're in a military organization. There's also the being able to just classify based on the location where the file was created. So say, for example, somebody created a file in the finance share. And I keep talking about files because I'm the file server guy, but you can think about it the same way as SQL, SharePoint, and other locations where other workloads where I create the data is pretty much a good way to be able to say this data belongs to that place. So if I put something in the finance share, then it's a finance document by default. If it moves around, it should stay a finance document. If somebody wants to say, no, this is not finance, you're wrong, they should be able to change it. So we talked about manual classification, we talked about location-based classification. The other way to classify data is by automatically scanning the content of the data. So I want to look for social security numbers and say if there's more than 100 social security numbers, then it's personal information, I want to protect it. Right? And this is a very good way to deal with a lot of data. As I said, nobody's going to go manually and just tag all your data. So content-based classification is a good way to deal with it. However, it's error-prone. And that's why if there's an error, you can have somebody manually change it. So let's say I classified some data as personal information, I RMS protected it, I'm not allowing anybody to access it, and so on. And somebody comes and says, there are two options there. One is, nobody cares. Nobody ever accesses this file. It's just somewhere in the archives. Nobody cares about it. So then it doesn't matter how you classified it. It's protected. You thought it's very important. You classified it. On the other hand, if somebody tries to access it and it fails, and it says, oh, I need to have access to this. It's just my grocery list. The content classification was completely wrong. I'm coding my groceries based on social security numbers. Then you can allow him access. You can just undo the check, and that's it. In most cases, you'd find nobody is going to access the data. Nobody cares. So you went through the automatic classification. You protected the file, and you did your job. It's not going to leak. If somebody really, really cares about it and cannot access the file, there's ways to provide them access to the file. Last but not least, there are applications that move data around. Say you have an HR application that takes data from a SQL database and writes it down as an Excel spreadsheet. And that data is PI information. The application knows that this is PI information. It can actually go ahead and tag the information as it writes it to the file share. So if you use all these methods to actually go ahead and tag your data, now you're able to really take action based on this tagging. Now, one of the things we saw is that we released the file classification infrastructure in Windows Server 2012, and what we saw is that people said, that's wonderful, we're going to go tag our data. Now, the first thing they did, they said, okay, let's think about how we're going to tag our data. What are we going to use to tag our data? We've, by the way, seen it in MSIT. We worked with them. It was 5 years ago already, or no. Yes, it was 5 years ago. Wow. We worked with them to go ahead and classify the data in Microsoft. And we went in the room and we started with a list of 200 different tags to classify files. And we said, no, we can't, the tool can do it, but that doesn't make any sense. What do you need to do with the information? So they said, we have, we need to know the business impact, high, medium, or low, and we need to know the retention of the documents, the retention period, so that we can retain them for the right amount of time, so we can get rid of them. So we said, okay, fine, you need two properties. You need an impact property, high, medium, or low, and you need the retention, which can have 20 different retention periods. But that's all you need, and that's all they used. So today we use impact and retention in Microsoft. We also added along the way some properties for e-discovery so that we can tag who the owners of the data were and who the owners of the data are, and whether it's a file for e-discovery or not. But that's basically it. We have like 3 or 4 properties that we use across Microsoft. And we saw with a lot of customers, a lot of you guys, when you try to think about, okay, how am I going to classify my data, we thought that the project stops when you initiate the how am I going to classify my data, because there's like a 6-year project to figure out how many properties, and it's by committee, and it never ends, and that's where people say, okay, fine, I don't know what to do with it. So in Microsoft, we went ahead and did the 6 months work. We basically said, let's go and look at regulatory documents, let's see what we're using, let's see what customers told us they're using, and just compose a list that would be the 90% case. And this is the list of properties of how we classify data. In 2012, we included that by default in the product so that you can just use it. You can enable them, you can use them. Can you use more? Of course. Do you need to use them? No. This is just a list of recommended properties that we put out there. So you have things like, you have things like confidentiality, of course. You have things like compliancy. What compliancy? Is it HIPAA? Is it SOX? And it can be a combination of these. You can apply on a file, say, it's low impact, but it's HIPAA. Or it's a high impact, and it contains PII, and so on and so on. And if you see, we actually found this is a pretty extensive list. We could use it in Microsoft easily. And although there are many other places where you want to put something that's special for you, you can still use parts of this list and add stuff that's special for you. So I'm going to go through a demo, and then I'll answer some questions. I'm 2, right? OK, so I'm on my file server here. And the first thing I'm going to show you is how I classify data as the content owner. So I'm the content owner now. I'm from the finance department. I just created a share. And let's say that when I create a share, I also need to go ahead and classify what the share is. So classification, what we call manual classification, is very simple. I just right-click, go to Properties, choose Classification. And what I see here is a list of properties that I can assign to this folder. Now, this list of properties is coming from Active Directory. In Windows Server 2012, we enabled classification, properties, definitions in Active Directory as part of dynamic access control. So what we're doing here is you can set what are the properties that all the organization uses consistently across everywhere, across all the file shares. And then I can go ahead as the content owner, say department equals finance. Again, and these lists are all coming from Active Directory, so they're all the same. They're all identified the same way. So I don't have someone fat fingering finance with an E or without an E and so on. OK, and when I apply it, it's just applied. Now every file within the finance department, every file that I put here, would be automatically tagged as department equals finance. All right, another way to classify information is based on the content. So if I go here and open this private information, and I have some credit card information here, of course it's bogus, otherwise I couldn't present it to you. And I go ahead and take this file and put it in some public share. So let me just drag and drop it to a public share. OK? So now what's happening, we have what we call here continuous automatic classification. As files are being stored on the system, we have automatic classification rules that come in. It's not real time, but it's a few seconds after. They come in and automatically classify the data. And if you look at this file now, you'll see that the file is classified as impact equals high, because the automatic classification rule found that there is a regular expression-based credit card information and tagged it as impact equals high. Let me show you how this looks like here in the File Server Resource Manager, which is running the automatic classification. So if you look here, there's classification management. There is the classification properties that are coming from Active Directory. You see the word global by the scope. And then there's classification rules, and the one that's running right now says, for all the relevant locations, apply content classification with impact equals high if you're finding this type of regular expression. And of course, you can do things like, I only want to tag it as high if there's more than 20 credit cards on the file, because maybe if it's one, I don't care about it. The last thing I wanted to say about classification is what we did in R2. Let me go back to the slide deck. What we did in R2 around classification is that there was one small thing that people asked us to do, where let's say I have a file that has some credit card information in it, and I tag it as impact equals high. And I send an email to the owner of the file and say, you have some high impact data here, you should just move it to a non-public share. the person that owns the document can go into the document and remove that, say, credit card information, because it shouldn't be there. Okay? So once he removes it, we want to now demote the impact equals I to just remove impact. Before 2012 R2, we couldn't do it. In 2012 R2, we allowed a way to say, if the rule doesn't match, then just go ahead and remove that property because basically the document has been changed. So we made that small tweak in R2 to be able to do that. All right. The last thing that I want to kind of tell you about classification, and it also is relevant for all other parts of the discussion, is that usually people have more than one file server in the organization. I know Microsoft has 3,000 of them that I care about dearly, and you're not going to go and configure each file server by itself. So for that, we released the data classification toolkit that allows you to it allows you to create a baseline of configuration and then export it from the file server that you create the baseline on, and then import it to all other servers. So basically, it looks something like that. So first of all, it comes on with a predefined pack already, with some classification rules about HIPAA and SOX and so on. So you can import that pack into a baseline file server or a staging file server. You can tweak it and do whatever you want, see that it's good, you like it, you run it, it all looks good. You export that baseline configuration, and you import it to all the servers. Now, this tool supports from 2008 R2 up to 2012 R2. So you don't need to go and replace all your file servers to just match the tool. And then we also collect the classification information, the classification reports, as well as other reports, and collect it into a central SQL database so that you can have central reports about, let's say, where is all my PII information, or where is all my HIPAA compliant information, and so on. So that is all within the data classification toolkit. Okay, so I'm going to stop now and answer questions about classification. If anyone is awake. Yes, please. That's an excellent question. The question was, how do we deal with encrypted documents? So you're right, we cannot scan the encrypted documents' content, so the content-based classification would not be able to scan them and tag them. You can still tag them manually if you wanted to, or if you put an encrypted document inside a folder that's tagged, it's going to get that tagging. So the question was whether we're going to provide any exception in our log. I believe that our log, well, we need to see, we need to try, and I didn't try it, but I think the classification log would show that we couldn't classify the document. That's one option that you can use. So of course, we have a classification log of everything we classified. Another option is for you to be able to use a file management task to scan for documents that are encrypted, that are not tagged, and then go ahead and have a report sent to the users that they need to tag their documents. So there's a few options there. Yes, please. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. There is a microphone. You're too far. You can come sit here, or there's a microphone. And then everybody can hear you.
Is there any way to set it up so you would have the classification rules where it has to meet a subset of rules, or maybe 2 or 3 of the rules before it's listed as a violation?
I'm sorry, I still didn't. Now I heard you, I didn't understand. So do you have an example?
Well, with Social Security numbers, where they have to meet the regular expression plus maybe the word SSN or Social Security numbers, and have to hit a few of those rules.
So you can set any regular expression that you want. I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but I'll just answer what I understood. You can set any regular expression that you want, and based on that, you can classify the data. Now, I'm not sure what you want to do after that. Is that...
Well, then you can report on which files are...
So you mean like report on violations on the... Yes, absolutely. So let's say that I put some high-impact information on this public share. I can get an email immediately saying, no, there's some high-impact information here. You should go and clean it up.
Is there any file size limitations for scanning?
There is no file size limitation for scanning. But there is types. So we do use, the content classification is using the same mechanism as search, which is basically iFilters. There's many iFilters available, but there's some type of files that iFilter is not available for. Yes?
So your company plans for eventual integration of those tools with, let's say, SharePoint, because people put in a lot of documents in the SharePoint project?
That's a great question. The question was about what's going on with SharePoint with this kind of tool set. And the answer is that I'm the file server guy, so I can't tell you. But, stay tuned. Yes, please. Excellent question. So the question was, how is the classification data stored in Active Directory? In Active Directory, we just store the definition of what classification we can apply. So we don't actually store the data, we just store the definitions. So say there's a property called impact, it can be high, medium, or low. Now the classification data is actually stored on the file, and we store it in 3 places. We store it in an alternate data stream, NTFS alternate data stream, so that when it moves between old systems, we can keep the file, we can keep the classification. For Office documents, we also store it inside the file, so that even if it moves outside of the organization, through email, it's still inside the file as custom data. And then also in 2012, we introduced the concept of secure properties, and we store them in the security descriptor. So we can apply security based on that, and I'll show you that in a second. Any other questions about classification? Yes, please. The question was, are there predefined rules? There are predefined rules in the data classification toolkit. So that's what I kind of mentioned, that you can import a package that we already prepared of classification rules. There's about, I think, 50 of them there. And you can use this as your baseline to start playing around with that. There's also companies, such as Data Global, that provide you a way to have a set of training documents that you can train the classification on, and then be able to then take that and use that as classification rules on the file server. Okay, I'm going to move on. So, the next very big innovation in Windows Server 2012 and Windows 8 is basically the kernel work that we've done to change the way we do access control. Now, it's not a change of now you need to use a whole new access control. It's a change of you can use your access control, it works. And you can also add more things on top of that. There were 2 things that we aimed for. One is to be able to allow you to manage fewer security groups. Anybody here has problems with security groups? Okay, so I hope that will help transition you to a better world with that. It's hard to change security, so it's very hard to touch security. Another thing is that we wanted to kind of take it a step forward and think about how you would use security in the future. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes after the example. So, just as an example, random example, let's say I have 50 country, like a file server with 50 countries, country shares. So I create 50 security groups so that the right people can access the right information. Then let's say for each country I have, 20 branches. So now I need to create 20 branches for each country. I get into 1,000 security groups. It's fine, I can still manage that. Let's say now that I have 100 customers per branch. Okay, now I got to 100,000 security groups. That's really, really hard to manage. And it's an example, right? You might not have that, but does anybody here have more than 50,000 security groups? Okay, so in Microsoft, we have more than 1 million security groups, just so you know. So I actually I worked on a project with Global Payroll. They had, on one file share, small file share, less than, I think it's 200 gigabytes, they had 90,000 different ACLs. And I'll go and prove who can access, who cannot access anything on that file share. It's just, you can't do it, it's a nightmare. We changed it to 20, by the way. So how can we make it better? There's a simple answer for that, and in Windows Server 2012 or Windows 8, you can just use end conditions in your expressions. So now in your access control expressions, you can say, if somebody is a member of US and is from the Seattle branch and he has, and he has access to the Contoso customer, then he can have access. So I just took the 100,000 groups and turned it into 170 groups, which is much more manageable. Now, if somebody moves from, say, the US to someplace else, then I just need to go and change his city and country, and I'm done. Yes, please. That is not attribute. This is all security groups. There's no attributes here. This is completely, there's no classification, there's no user claims, there's no device claim. It's just security groups. You can go to an ACL on 2012 or on Windows 8, right-click, security, and add an ACL that has ands and ors in the condition. Okay? And you can just use that. There's no change here. I didn't introduce anything new. You can use your existing security groups. It's all there. Yes, please.
So that's essentially your ACL, but you still have, that looks like member of US and member of Seattle and member of Contoso.
Yeah.
So that's 50 times 20 times 1,000.
Actually not, because before that, let's say you were a member of US and branch, where are you from in US? And branch Atlanta. So you would need to be in a group called US Atlanta. Okay, right? Now you need to be in a group called US and in a group called Atlanta, right? And if you move from Atlanta to Seattle, we just move you from Atlanta to Seattle in the group, and that's it. Make sense? Yeah. That's simple, okay? So you can just go use that. You don't have to, but you can go use that. Security groups, nothing fancy here. But that ACE that allows you to do ands and ors is crazy good. Yes, please.
What is the impact of performance?
So the performance is unnoticeable from a user perspective. It's just, of course it depends on the expressions that you use. If you use 100,000, ands and ors there, to just take time to evaluate. This is all done in the kernel mode. It's very, very optimized for performance. Like we didn't see, in 2012, we did a lot of tests on that. We didn't see any noticeable performance impact, both with this and with central access policies that I'm going to go into right now. Yeah. It's all done local on the kernel level. Yeah. Okay. Let's take that a step forward. So we have expressions in the conditions, in the access conditions. Now let's see what we did with that. We said, okay, we have security groups, that's great, it's working, people can use it. What else can we introduce into the equation of the access control? So one thing that's very interesting, as we kind of think of role-based access control and so on, is user claims. Is this user in the finance department, or is he in the HR department? What's its user clearance, and so on and so on. So we have the concept of user claims. These user claims are actually taken from Active Directory. So if you have a user claim in Active Directory that says department equals finance, then we can take that into the username, into the user token, Kerberos token, and use that in access conditions. Then there's also device claims. Device claim is what the device is. Is the device a managed device or non-managed device? Is it in the finance department? Let's say, for example, I could say that I'd like to have finance data only accessed by devices that are mandated by and approved by the finance department, and so on. So this is the device claims. And then there's the resource properties, the classification of the data, what the data is. So you can do things like, allow access only if user department equals file.department and device is a managed device. Now, a few things I want to say about this. First, we introduced the notion of what we call compound identity. So it's not only the user, it's the user and device. So we changed the Windows Kerberos token to include both who the user is and what the device is. Some trains scheduled to run here all the time. I don't know. But you don't have to use this. You don't have to use user claims. You don't have to use device claims. You can just use security groups. You can just use user claims. The more you use, the more security you get, the more fine-grained you get. But you can start from just security groups here. The second thing I want to say is device claims is only for Windows 8 devices. Of course, Windows 8.1 as well. So if you're coming from a Windows 7 device, you can still use user claims, but device claims would not be able to get into the server for authorization. So if you say, for example, if device is managed, then only Windows 8 devices that are managed would be able to access the data. What else did I want to say here? Yeah, I also want to mention, I don't know if you guys, do you guys know about AD Federation Services? Okay, so there's a lot of questions about claims with AD Federation Services and how this relates to this. So there is a one-way transition from this model with Kerberos and Windows and Active Directory to AD Federation Service. If you consume from AD Federation Service, if you consume a Windows Kerberos token, then it consumes these claims and is able to transfer them into the SAML token or OAuth token. But there's no other way, so it's only a one-way transition. The other way doesn't work. If you have an ADFS token, the file server would not recognize it because the file server is using Kerberos. Okay? So just so you know, we see ADFS as kind of like the next generation, and that's where it knows how to consume from many different repositories and knows how to take it up. We had a demo, in the previous TechEd, we had a demo with ADFS kind of projecting these claims up to the cloud, to a cloud service, which was pretty cool. But it's a one-way transition. So it's not, if you use ADFS for authentication, the file server would not be able to recognize the claims or the device claims that's there. I'll do the demo and then we'll get time for questions. So going back here, if you look at that access policy, there's nothing that says here, oh, you need to apply it to this specific folder. Because the access policy is about what the files are, is it impact equals I, and what the user is and what the device is. That means that I can actually apply it across all my organization in the same way to have a consistent access control. So I can say for I-impact information or for PI information that's from HR, only these folks can access it, no matter where the information lies. And this is you can use this in the local ACE on your file system, but now we also introduced a concept called central access policies, because we're now not talking about a specific location where the information is, we're talking about what the information is. So imagine you can use this across your organization, and we introduced the concept of central access policies that we call safety net policies that allows you to do things like, in Microsoft we have only FTEs, only folks that have the FTE claim can actually, a full-time employee, sorry, FTE, can access products that are in beta. It's simple. It's across we deploy it across the company. If you have a product that's tagged as beta, only FTEs can access it. Or, for safe harbor, only a specific group of people can access safe harbor information. So when the information comes in Germany and it's tagged as safe harbor, then only a specific set of people can access it because we have a central access policy that governs that access. And how does it look like? In Active Directory, you can define what user claims you want to use, what resource properties, the resource properties definitions that I showed you, what the access policy is. That gets deployed to the file server, applied, and then when the end user tries to come in, they get either access allowed or access denied. One word of caution. If you go and jump directly into, if you want to use user claims as you go out of this room, you want to make sure that the user claims are security, are clean for security. What does that mean? If you have something that changes all the time, let's say department. In Microsoft, we have, I don't know how many departments, 10,000 departments, we keep renaming them and so on. You can't really use that for security because let's say I had the finance department and I decided to change it to the great finance department. All the finance department are going to lose access immediately because we want to have user.department equals resource.department unless I go and change 200 million files from finance to great finance. So that's one thing to think about. If it changes constantly, if the values change constantly, you don't use it for security. Another thing that's important to think about is what is the source of that attribute for the user. If the finance attribute can be changed by the user, of course you can't use it for security because anybody could say, hey, I'm from HR, right? So you can't use it. You have to have a secure attribute in Active Directory that's controlled by a system that allows you to set that attribute specifically. Systems like FIM, the Forefront Identity Manager, can be used for that. But that's what you want to think about when you think about user claims. You can't just use anything for user claims. If you want to use it for security, it has to be secure from the source to the attribute in Active Directory. Let's see a demo. So now I'm going to Active Directory, if I can find it here. And I'm in Active Directory Administration Center. And I want to show you the Dynamic Access Control tab in Active Directory. So we already talked about the resource properties. By the way, can you read it from back there? Can you read it well? Thank you. Okay. So we talked about the resource properties. You see there's a bunch of them here. I enabled a few of them. Like, I enabled company, I enabled impact. Sorry, impact is enabled, country is enabled, and so on. But all the others were just there, right? And I could choose to enable or disable them. I could create new ones as well. It's not a problem. I could change existing ones. And I also have central access rules here. So let's look at these guys. So this is a central access policy that says, for all information where there is a tagging that it belongs to a specific department. Why is that important? Because if it's not tagged, we don't want to limit access to it. Let's say you have, kernel32.dll in the system folder. It's not tagged as a specific department. If you're going to actually not allow access to it, you can't run Windows. So you want to make sure that you just target the information that you're tagging. And then the access condition. It's pretty simple. We have owners can access the information, administrators can access, system can access. These are just default ones that we put there. You can decide if you want to leave them there or not. You can remove them if you want. And we also have this one that says, allow access if user department equals resource department. Okay, so we have that central access policy that's deployed across the file servers. Then we have another one here. That's for impact information that says if the file is tagged as impact, then go ahead and protect and allow only owners to access it or system to access it. Okay, so we have that as well. And now let's go and see how we deploy that on the file server. So on the file server, I can go ahead and say, this department share, properties, security, advanced, and I have here a central access policy tab that says you can change it to get the access policy from Active Directory, and I just applied it. You see the two rules here. I'll click OK, and I'm done. Now, the data classification toolkit allows you to deploy this across multiple servers. So you can say, deploy this access policy across all my servers. Now, as a user, let's go to the user share. So as a user, let's see who the user is. So I can do who am I and ask for the claims as well. And you can see that this is Tim, and Tim is from the operations department. So if I go as Tim to the department shares, and I go to operations, I can go and do my work as regular as I work regularly on the file share. However, if I try to go to finance, I'm going to get an access denied. Now, since I'm running here, this is actually Windows 8, it's not 8.1 even. Since I'm running on Windows 8, I get a special access denied that's customized to the location I try to access. So you can say, this is the finance department. You need to go and ask permission from that specific person to access the data. I can also send a request assistance for somebody to help me to get access. So I can send it, and it would get to the right owner of the data. So let's say I did that. And just to complete the scenario here, let's say the file server admin went and said, OK, let me see why Tim does not have access here. So the file server admin, or even the finance admin, can go here into finance, properties, security, and show this wonderful effective access control that I can say, what does Tim have access to? And the nice thing about this is that it takes into account all the policies, the share policy, the file policy, the central access policy, and it shows you that Tim cannot access for read because of the department access rule. Okay, he cannot access for example, for write because of also the file rule, the file permissions, but for read he cannot access because of the department access rule. So then I can also say, let's say you have this situation where somebody cannot access data, but there's like 20 groups that might allow him to access data. How do you figure out which one? Do you add him to the group and then wait a day until everything kind of calms down and ask him, OK, do you have access now? Do you add him to all 20 groups? That's a problem. That's one other thing that we solved here. You can just say, what if Tim was from the finance department? And you would see that now Tim will be able to access the data. Now, this tool doesn't put Tim in the finance department, but it lets you know what you can do in order to allow Tim access. So it kind of closes the end-to-end scenario of being able to limit the access, see what the effective access is, and make sure you provide the right recommendation of how to allow access. All right, so we're done with this part of the demo. Any questions? And I'll take 2 or 3. Yes, please. So the question was, what is the impact on token size and token bloat? So that's a really good question. We actually did a lot of work there as well. We optimized the token in 2012. There's a lot of compression going on there. And if you think about it, we have numbers of how much claims take. They take around, depending on the claim size, they take around 15, 20 bytes for the claim itself, and then there's a bunch of other information that's based on what the data is. If it's a number, it's just a number. If it's a long string, it's a long string. So it really depends on the claim size, on the data size. But if you think about what the claim replaces, it replaces a lot of groups if you're actually going to claims. So then the token size gets smaller. Now, also with the new conditions that we add to the ACRs, you can start replacing groups so that you no longer need to be in 100 groups. You can be only in 2 or 3 groups, and that allows you to decrease the token size. The other thing we did is that we actually increased the default token size with Kerberos so that you have a lot of space while you're transitioning. One more question. Yes, please.
How can we leverage this with delegation declaration in Active Directory?
So the question is about using this kind of controls with Active Directory itself. So in Active Directory attributes, you want to do access control on Active Directory itself. Okay, so in 2012 or 2012 you cannot do that on Active Directory. Okay, this is right now it's in the file system itself, so it's relevant to Windows file system. By the way, we didn't even change NTFS to do that. It's all below in the kernel level. It's all in the authorization mechanism, so you can use it with any Windows API that uses authorization. All right, let's move on to talk about RMS protection. So as you limit access to the file on the file server, it's great. But if somebody has access to the file, they can take the file and send it by email to whoever they want. So that's a problem. Because if I have a file with personal information of 100 or 200,000 customers, then if somebody sends it out, I'm completely losing my reputation and I'm going to get sued. And this is not an example, it's reality, right? People do that all the time. So we want to make sure that we add another layer of protection automatically on top of this file. Now, we can ask users to RMS encrypt their files or to use some kind of encryption, but they don't do that. You know, we can work and work and work to educate people, but they just don't do it. They forget, they make mistakes. So we want to make sure we have some kind of an automatic way to say this is our compliance and leakage prevention mechanism. If we find PI information, we're going to encrypt it. By the way, any presentation or document that I write about Windows vNext just gets encrypted automatically for me on the file server. And the reason this happens is that I use client-side caching, and my files go to the file server, they get scanned and protected automatically, and it's protected to Microsoft all. So if I send it to many, you would just be able to open it, it's not a problem. I can even remove the protection. It's not an issue. But if I send it outside by any chance, by mistake, then that person that I send it to will not be able to open the document. Another nice thing that we did is we integrated that into the Windows Server 2012, our 2 work folders, so that if you have BYOD devices that are using the file server as their repository for users' data, that users' data can be scanned and automatically protected as well. So let's look at the demo here. So now if I go to my client, before I go to my client, I want to show you something. So remember the public share here, okay? We have these public tools, private information, and party time docx. So we have like three components here, three objects. If I go to my client, let's go back to team here. If team goes into the public shares, close this so that it's clean. He sees only 2. Why does he see only 2? Anyone has an idea? Yeah, we had the central access policy that says for high impact data, only the owner of the file can access it. Now the file that I dragged before, I showed you that it was classified as impact equals high. And what happens there is that the central access policy takes place, and I have access-based enumeration enabled on this share, so that you cannot see files that you don't have access to. Now, on the other share, I didn't do it, because otherwise I couldn't show you access denied remediation. But usually you would want to use access-based enumeration on shares, public shares, because otherwise people might see the name of the files, even though they can't access it. And the name might be revealing as well, like a list of people that are going to be fired in the next 30 days. So you don't want this to be also shown to other people. Now, I have a customer information document here the team is working on. and he has some confidential data, he has some credit card information here, and you can see the file is not protected. Now, Tim mistakenly took that file and copied it into the public share. And what's happening right now on the back end, the file server sees the content, sees the document, automatically classifies it, sees, oh, it's high impact. And then it runs another task, which is a file management task that's in the same tool set, the file server resource manager. It runs it on that document to RMS encrypt the data because it's high impact. So while I was talking, hopefully the file server did its thing. And if I open the document now, you can see that the document is protected with the high impact data template, RMS template that I'm using in my organization. Now, one thing to know about RMS, who here has RMS deployed in the organization? Wow, it's a lot of people. RMS is coming up with an online version, so you don't even need to deploy it. We take care of everything. You can just use it, and we maintain it. It's in the cloud, and you can use RMS Online to actually protect your data for your organization. Last thing that I wanted to show you is the integration with work folders. So I have here two clients. I have here my Office PC. Okay. So I have here my Office PC with some data. And let me do this for you. And I also have here my Surface with my data as well. Okay, so I have my Office PC, I have my Surface that's at home, or actually Tim has it, it's not me. I don't have that privilege. And then I have some customer information here as well. Again, it's not protected. And I'm just going to, okay, now to close it, it's going to be hard. Come on. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that thing over here to my work folders. If you want to know more about work folders, there is a session later today. But basically, it allows you to take the desktop information, and it extends what was offline files and client-side caching into the scenario where I have devices that are at home, or devices that I take with me as I go around on the road. So as you can see, the customer, oh, it didn't yet. Okay, let's see if I was supposed to already replicate. So first thing that happened is that customer information, as you can see, it got RMS encrypted. Make sure. So it's already RMS encrypted on my Office device, and it should have been replicating to my other device. Let's see if I can try to pick it up with. And if I can't, that's okay as well. Now, see, I have some sync issues here, so that would not work. But basically what you would have seen is that this content gets replicated also to my Surface device, and it's RMS encrypted, so that I actually use my Office device, I create my document. I don't care about RMS encryption. I just put the information that I need there. It gets uploaded up to my file server and then downloaded to all my other devices while it's RMS encrypted. All right, and with that, I'll hand off to Manny.
Thank you, Nir. Yeah, good. There we go. How's it going, everybody? My name is Manny Murguia. I've been with Microsoft for about 6 years now, working with the Department of Defense and Microsoft's National Security Group. And I'm here today to show you a customer example of how we actually implemented dynamic access control, RMS, and file classification infrastructure. The first slide that I'm going to show you here is actually the customer environment, just a real high-level view of what it looks like. You can see on the left is a user accounts forest where all of the user accounts go. There's no other servers except domain controllers in that forest. On the right side is the resource forest. That's where all the file servers go, SharePoint, Exchange, RMS servers, certificate authorities, all of the resources go over there. You'll see that we also have selective authentication enabled on the trust. There was a question earlier from this young lady in the back about how do we hide data in Active Directory. This is how our customer decided to hide that data in the directory. Was the selective authentication prevents users in the accounts forest from reading Active Directory in the resource forest. So all of our rule sets for dynamic access control, FCI properties, those are all stored in the resource forest Active Directory and hidden from the user's view. Okay, does anybody have any questions about this particular slide? The 2012 file server, domain controllers, or anything? Does everyone know the minimum requirement for implementing dynamic access control? No. It's a 2012 file server, a 2012 domain controller, and that's it. There's no domain functional level. There's no forest functional level. You just have to have one 2012 file server and one 2012 domain controller.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that
Yeah.
I forgot to mention is that you need one 2012 domain controller. It's not that you need to turn all your environment to be 2012.
Right.
And all clients, you can use any clients.
And in this particular solution, you'll notice that, I'm sorry, you have a question?
So the resource forest has to be 2012, but could the account forest be 2003?
That's a great question, and I usually expect at least one person to think of that during the presentation. You do not have to have a 2012 domain controller in the accounts forest unless you're using cross-forest claims. Okay? Cross-forest claims requires that both domain controllers have 2012. I'm sorry, both forests have 2012 domain controllers. Another question?
Before the question, it's not that the forest does not need to be 2012 forest.
Right.
It's just that, or the domain. It's just you need one domain controller to be 2012. You can have other domain controllers that are 2008, 2008 R2, and so on.
The question? So access-based enumeration doesn't work if users have write permission to a file but not read.
So we might take it offline afterwards. Okay?
Yeah, we'll dive into that detail after if that's okay. Another question? That's a great question. The question was on user account forest, do we have a provisioning system? There is a full identity management system. It's a really good one called FIM. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's a really nice company. Microsoft sells it. FIM does manage all the identities, the group memberships, all the claims the attributes for the users that are sometimes used as claims in certain scenarios, not this particular scenario. So yes, identity management is a must for a system like this, really. Oh, I'm sorry, no. The actual system is deployed in the resource forest. Yes. Yeah, we don't stick anything in the accounts forest that we don't absolutely have to. That's why when 2008 R2 came out with the cross-forest CAs and auto-enrollment, that was a great plus, because we didn't have to have CAs in the accounts forest anymore either. Are there any other questions about this particular scenario? These are all great questions, so it's going to lead straight into the actual solution example. All right. So with this customer, you see down at the bottom the customer-defined policy for access to information. The user must be a member of a COI. COI is a community of interest. Okay? We could just, for the purposes of this presentation, we'll think of it as a group, because that's all it really is. And one of the things we wanted to do is have the customer reuse their investment in all those groups that they already had for these COIs, and not just jump straight to claims, because that's really just going to make this the problem more complex in the beginning. Okay, we're just doing kind of stepping stones into the final solution, which I'll show you on the next slide. So for this particular slide, the resource property definition that we created in Active Directory was called COI, for community of interest. We have one file rule, and you can see how they stack up, the file rules stack up and actually use the resource property definition from the bottom up. And then finally, those file rules were put into one central access policy, deployed via group policy and then applied on the share. Okay, so it was really easy to implement the solution. If you look at the bottom note, access to folders is controlled through NTFS. We're not doing any of the dynamic access control with folders yet. We're only using it for files specifically. Okay. I'm sorry, are there any questions about the solution? Because this is the solution that I'm going to demo today, not the future one, because we haven't gotten there yet. It's in the future. All right. So in the future, we plan on using dynamic access control with claims. And we also plan on centralizing all of our folder permissions as well. And in order to do that, we chose to separate the COI for a specific piece of data versus the COI for a folder, which we see as a security container that could hold any type of data. It could even be the wrong COI's data. But we have to prevent the people that are read onto that particular COI from seeing the data that they're not read onto. And that's how we plan on preventing data spillage scenarios. And I'm going to demonstrate what we do with a data spillage scenario in today's demo when I get there, which is just next. Does anybody have any questions about this slide? I know there's a lot of words on it. It's a lot easier just to look at the picture. You've got 2 COI properties, one for folders, one for files. All your file rules use those resource property definitions, and then there's still one central access policy for all the data in all the folders. It's pretty straightforward, and I'll actually show you, because it looks like I have plenty of time.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about it is that, as Manny said, the customer could go on a very long project to start using claims and get everything that they want in the future. But what they did is they actually had a practical solution using security groups that Manny very easily deployed in their premises and just enabled them to reach that security level that they need. And then they can think about, okay, what do we do with claims? How do we deal with claims? And how do we actually go and implement that in the future?
Are there any questions about the future solution? Or any questions about the future that I can answer for you? Question? No, sorry, I was just mentioning that, so the question was, are we using DAC for Exchange and SharePoint? I was just mentioning the fact that all of our resources are going in the resource forest, not that we're actually using DAC for those products. I just wanted to make sure to get the point across about where the resources are. That was it. Question? So the question is, where are the client machines in the user and resource forest scenario? They're in the user forest. We chose to put them there for security reasons. I'm sorry, what was that again? Okay. We'll talk about that after the presentation. Are there any other questions about the slide or the solution? Sorry. No? Okay.
By the way, somebody asked about SharePoint. So again, the dynamic access control mechanisms really make sense for SharePoint and other repositories as well. And we do have partners such as Next Labs or Titus that developed products that use dynamic access control on SharePoint and other workloads.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go into the demo now. I'm going to be changing to number 8. Number 8.
Didn't change. Really? Is it in?
Yeah.
You want to plug in my?
I'm on number 8.
Are you projecting?
I don't know.
Do the
I
Windows
was
speed?
before.
No, not.
Duplicate. What was
Nope.
that? Sorry about this technical malfunction.
You wanna
I'm
use
doing a
mine?
live demo, that's the problem. I'm doing a live demo, that's the problem. It's just not, it's not coming up on the screen.
You want to use mine?
How can I use yours? I gotta have my
Oh, the plug.
Yeah, you're plugged in.
It'll take us a second. If you want, I can sing, but then you leave the place.
You don't want him to sing.
Okay. Take mine.
There.
You got it? Okay.
I rebooted it. I unplugged it and plugged it back in.
Okay. All I need was to unplug this and it works. Okay.
Unfortunately, now I've completely lost it on my screen. All right, that's fine. All right, so what you're seeing here is, let me start off by saying this. This is not an accounts and a resource forest scenario. Okay, this is just a single forest. What I'm going to do is get the point across about the user experience with the data. I didn't want to build this crazy resource accounts forest environment for you for the demo. I have 3 client machines at the top. Client 1, Client 2, and Client 3. Those are for 3 different users, User 1, User 2, and User 3. You can guess which one uses which machine. User 1 is in a COI, a group called COI1. User 2 is in a group called COI2. User 3 is in both groups. Okay? I have this central share called the P drive that I use for all my users. In that P drive, I actually have 2 folders, COI1 and COI2. This user can only see COI1. Can anyone tell me why that user can only see COI1? I think somebody said it over there earlier. Abe, access-based enumeration, right? So we are using access-based enumeration in the solution. We have to in order to hide the data. So if I go to Client 2, this user can only see COI2 folder. And if I go to Client 3, this user sees both folders. Okay, so I'm going to go to Client 1, and I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to make it a text document. Hello, TechEd. And I'll just go ahead and put some data in the file. I'm going to copy it up to this share. Now what I'm going to show you is, right now the file has no classification. Okay, it's not classified as anything. I didn't put any classification in the file. On the file server, I have both folder and content classification rules, which if people want to see those after, we'll show you afterward if you want to see that. I'm going to jump over to Client 3 and look in folder 1, and you can see, I'm going to go ahead and hit F5 for you, that the user cannot see the file yet. This is not synchronization. This is not replication. This is dynamic access control. Because the file is not classified, no other users can see the file. Now the file is classified, so the other user can see the file. Okay? I can jump to the file server. Go to the properties of that file, go to the classification tab, and actually show you that the COI was marked as COI1, only based on the location of the file. The file was in COI1 folder, so the folder classification rule made it COI1. I'm going to go back to Client 1. I'm going to create a Word document this time. If I can see the screen. Jeez. There it is. I'll call it Hello TechEd. Put some data in the Word file. And the reason I'm doing Word this time is to show you the RMS capability. Copy that into the share. The user is unable to see the file because of dynamic access control. We haven't gotten to the really cool part. I know this isn't too exciting. I'm saving the best for last. So after just a few seconds of hitting F5, it'll work, I promise. There it goes. The file is being RMS protected. Okay, so there's now the file, RMS protected. It's 141 kilobytes. It's pretty big. I'm going to view the permissions on that file, and I've used a COI template, an RMS template for COI1. So now if I were to email this file to a person who's not in COI1, they would not be able to open that file because it's RMS protected. I also can't copy or print the document. This is all just part of the RMS template. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Last but not least, I have a real quick question for everybody. Who's ever been to a magic show? Magic show. You guys like magic? I'm going to do some magic right now. Magic. I've only got one thing that I do, so. what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this text file, and I'm going to put COI2 eyes only. So this is a file that's in COI1. And remember I told you it was originally classified with a folder classification rule. Now I've put the wrong classification actually in the document, which means that my content classification rule, which scans for COI2 eyes only, is going to want to change that classification. So you see that the file actually disappeared automatically. Okay, but it didn't disappear because the user is not in COI2, because this user is in COI2. Everybody catch that? That's the magic part. Vanished, gone. I'm going to go back to client 1, the file, gone. What happened to it? Well, the customer said, I don't want data spillage scenarios to happen. That was their real problem. So if I take a file that's classified for one COI, and I drop it in the wrong COI folder, so if I take one from COI1 to COI2, paste it in there, the rules on the back end see that that file is classified for a different COI that does not belong in that folder. And it expires that file, which is basically the same as quarantining the file. So it's still on the file server, but if we go to C, quarantine, what is the date and timestamp there? Continuous. COI1. And there's the hello TechEd file. It has been quarantined and removed from any user accessing that file. You could also alert the administrator or alert your security office so that they can then go punish the user for either marking the file incorrectly or moving it between folders. But at no time did the data spillage actually occur. Are there any questions about that? No? All right, well, we're out of time. So if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to go ahead and come up to the front. We'll be here for at least a few minutes. Can you go ahead and go back to one there?
Thank you very much, guys.
And everyone fill out your evaluations. Thank you.